But the first remit in the first couple of years was build and launch the first expected goals model in football, like to the public. There's more to football analytics than just building pizza charts. The XG of a chance for Heung-min Son is different to that for William Saliba from the same shot in the same situation because, one is clinical at both feet, good ball striker, the other's a centre back who doesn't necessarily score goals. CV's a one pager. If you give someone a link to like your ideas, your thinking, the way your mind works, that's like so much more powerful. So we'd jump in my banged up Ford Fiesta and drive around to clubs around the country, essentially saying like, look, we'll take your Opta data and we were turning that into insights. So everyone's looking at the same pool, like you say, of players, but there are players that are still on those clubs that fall out of that. And those for me are the ones where you can find value in the market. Names will be flagged using data, using the different tools that we build with the different data sets. They then get assigned to scouts and the scouts will do the work. It's like classic, you send like a big body of work to someone who's in like a powerful, prestigious position and you get like a one-line reply. It was like, let's meet for a cuppa. And I was like, okay, there's a lot of data out there which you can build a lot of cool things on.
Yeah. Hello and welcome back to the Chris Gill podcast, and today's guest is Tom Worville. So Tom is somebody that I've wanted on the channel for a while now, so I'm really happy to have managed to finally get this one done with Tom. So Tom is somebody with a vast array of experiences within football analytics, and he doesn't actually come from a sporting background, at least academically, which is I think is what makes this even more impressive. So you probably know Tom from Twitter at Worville. So Tom started an online presence when he kind of decided that he wanted to work within football analytics. He had his own website and obviously posting on his social media accounts. And obviously from there, Tom has gone on to start and co-found a football analytics consultancy, which he then moved on from. He has worked in the club setting, he has worked in the media setting, and now back full circle with a different football analytics consultancy. So it's really interesting to hear about Tom's journey. He goes into how each of the roles came about, what he did in each of the roles, and basically gives some great advice for people looking to do a similar journey and get started within football analytics that maybe don't come from a football or sport degree. So really interesting conversation. Really enjoy this one. So thanks again, Tom. So without further ado, let's get into the rest of the video. Okay, so one final thing before we get into the conversation, I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's video, which is the APFA, or the Association for Professional Football Analysts. So being a football analyst myself, this partnership makes perfect sense. So this is an association created by analysts for analysts, and they're doing a great job supporting people working in the industry. So there is a link down below, but more on those guys later. Let's get straight into today's video. Tom, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, really good. Thank you. Really excited to chat to you today, and thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, perfect. We've been trying to get this a while, but see, we've both been busy. You went away, I think I went away. So yeah, we're finally getting it done. So looking forward to this. So first thing, I think it's probably a good place to start, Tom. I want to ask you about kind of the online presence and kind of making a name for yourself, because obviously a lot of the things we're going to talk about in terms of the roles that you've done probably stemmed from that first blog post you put out, or that first thing that you did. So because one thing I do get asked a lot is how do I get started? I'm sure you do as well. How do I get started in sports analysis and all this sort of stuff? And you do come from a non-sporting background in terms of your degree, don't you? So
yeah,
you can give a bit of background on that first, Tom.
Yeah, completely. So I guess it was similar to when I was like kind of go through university, and then around that time looking to. It starts way back. I essentially was on a sandwich year at university at a company called Accenture, worked for a client for a couple of weeks, and after like 2 or 3 weeks I was like, I can't do this. Like, I thought my path would have been study economics, go down the kind of like consulting route or something around that. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, but that seemed like an option. And then after that I was like, I can't do this. So I was like, right, I'm just gonna have to start just trying to there's a kind of growing football analytics scene back then. A lot of kind of bloggers who now work at clubs were kind of writing and doing work, and I thought that I really want to do that. I really want to be part of that. So from that, I got home that night, started a WordPress, and just started focusing on essentially like what is a intersection of my interest in football, my studies in economics, and what's a kind of league or area I can focus on that's in that. And I started really getting into MLS around like 2014, 2015, and just writing loads of stuff around the salary cap and stats and things like that. And that kind of really is where that came from, is a bit of like, I don't want to go down this route in life. I want to go down this one. So that's where it started really. And then from then just like took off and just kept pushing and kept posting really.
So from the early days then, Tom, how often were you posting on was it your blog, or was it WordPress, or was it your Twitter? Was it both? Like, how did you kind of manage the different platforms to do?
Yeah, good question. I think like Twitter at the time was far more popular and far more there was a lot more of like a community at that time. So that was definitely like the main one which you can obviously try and grow a following, and that's how your stuff gets read really. So I was probably only posting once every couple of weeks, I think, at the peak, but
Mm.
I'd also be posting stuff on Twitter the whole time and asking a lot of questions of people in football and just doing a lot of kind of digging and things around football analytics on Twitter. So I was kind of lucky at the time that that was a yeah, like I say, like this community, this space where a lot of people were learning and discussing ideas around football at the time. So
Yeah,
probably more, definitely more so kind of Twitter than the blog, but you needed the blog as a place to have those ideas and
yeah,
store them really.
yeah. So in terms of what like the path you did, then do you think that that same thing that you did in terms of getting started with a blog could that be done now? Is that still a thing? Like,
Yeah, 100%. I think it's almost like not done enough, and people are actually like up and coming analysts will just do like threads on Twitter and
mm,
things like that, and you do see the odd like longer LinkedIn posts. But I think having kind of a central, if it's a WordPress or a Medium account, or you can start a self-hosted website with R or Python like really quite easily these days with GitHub.
mm,
Like I do think those are really powerful because essentially it's much more dynamic version of a CV, essentially, for like any job, any opportunities. Like CVs are one pager. If you give someone a link to like your ideas, your thinking, the way your mind works, that's like so much more powerful. So yeah, I think it's possible, and maybe it's because I don't follow as many people who are like kind of like coming up and students and people coming out of university. I don't see it as much, but definitely think that the path that's still the right route to take, 100%.
and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I presume it's probably easier to get hold of data and stuff like from what you did at we're going back what 10 years when you started or
10
so?
years now, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well,
So
yeah,
how?
I think back then it was very much like you kind of knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who could scrape who scored. And now you've got like FBref has a lot of data, which is easy to get access to. StatsBomb have got a whole host of historical seasons of Premier League data. I think there's 3 seasons of Women's Super League data just there for free. Like that is huge. If you want to, I mean, it's not as you can't be like who are Arsenal going to get to replace Gabriel Jesus or something like that.
Hmm,
But everyone's writing about that. Like
yeah,
you don't really need to focus on that. The more interesting stuff is like, can you develop a new model or a new way of measuring something in the game? And if you can apply it to 3 years of WSL data, when a club gives you the keys to 30 leagues of stats bomb, like you're flying. So there's a lot of data out there which you can build a lot of cool things on.
yeah. So what would you say then, Tom, to someone that asked that question? How do I get started? What would your first kind of? Let's just say they've literally not got any presence online.
Yeah.
Obviously, got the knowledge. They've got some knowledge in terms of the coding knowledge. What would you do first three things to set them on the path to have that portfolio to become employable?
Yeah, great question. So I think the first one is definitely just like get started with a blog. So literally set something up. Doesn't have to be a massive overhead, like I said, like a Medium account or something like that. So like get that started first thing. Second thing is probably find your niche after that. So of the available data out there that you can find or things like that, or obviously in the analysis space as well, it's everyone can cover and analyze the Premier League, but
Mm,
you can watch the J League on YouTube matches like that. So like, what's your niche that you can find where there's access to the tools and resources, which then you can kind of make that your domain. And then the third thing is probably like seek feedback. So in the beginning, if you don't have a lot of followers on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever kind of like media of choice you're on, you're probably not going to get a lot of feedback. Like I remember sitting there, I'd post like a piece on WordPress and I'd sit there for like an hour afterwards, just press and refresh to see if the user analytics would go up.
yeah,
And at the peak, like, your mindset changes. When you start with 10 people read your article, you're absolutely buzzing. And then after a few months, 100 people, like 10 won't associate you anymore. So then it's 100 people.
mm,
What you really need in that first moment is like a small group of people you trust and you just want to get good feedback from them. So that can be friends, it can be family. Like I had a group of my flatmates at the time that I'd send my articles to and just be like, I know you know nothing about football, but kind of what do you think about this? Am I explaining my ideas in the right kind of way? Is my writing solid? What do you think of my visuals? Like
yeah,
you don't need masses and masses of people for feedback. You need one or two who actually are going to give you that time of day, really. And I will kind of give a fourth one because I think it's important. Like when I started blogging and doing this stuff, I through kind of Twitter met a bunch of other analysts who were trying to break in at the same time, essentially. Never met any of them before. One was in Canada, two were in London, I was in Leeds at the time. But we'd message every single day. We were all kind of trying to start out.
yeah,
And I think a lot of people will be in the same boat where if you're trying to start out, there'll be like-minded
Mm.
people also trying to do the same thing. So like message them, like say, see you're trying to do similar things. It'd be great to bounce ideas off each other. And that is how, you kind of start communities, and those relationships and bonds you build with people through that work. That can lead somewhere as well in the future to opportunities and things like that. So I think that's a really important one as well. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That I can resonate with that just from like a different perspective in terms of like, for example, when I've started doing this podcast, I've done the same thing, just speak to other podcasters and kind of, you just learn things and obviously bounce ideas about. So that's definitely a thing. You mentioned obviously find your niche there, Tom. So, because this is a question I do also get asked a lot in terms of like, how should you niche down? Like when you started, you mentioned the MLS, was that
Yeah.
your thing? And did you
Yeah.
stick to that and deviate from that? Or because it can be a balance of how niche do you go and how soon do you go niche kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. I think like the reason I chose MLS was because you could get public salary data, and I
Mm,
was really interested in like, who were the players who were playing really well, but they were really, really undervalued. Essentially, they were paid like a really low wage, but they're a really, really key player. Um, there was a midfielder, I can't remember his name now. I'm going to be kicking myself later, but it's a Canadian midfielder who was playing for. I can't remember who. So he was essentially like a bit of a six, bit of an eight.
yeah,
Came through, was on like a league minimum contract, and he'd play every minute, and he would be like fantastic. And it'd be like this guy should be earning like 500,000 a year, but he's getting paid like 100 grand a year. And those ones I was really liked finding. So I think to start with, it's like just like kind of found the niche because I was interested. I think yeah, it's a bit I guess like chicken and egg, but
mm,
I do think it's probably worth to start with if you are going to start out, you need to be interested to write this stuff. Like when you're learning to code, I found it's really hard to learn to code through using the examples they give you of like, I don't know, mortgage data sets, things like that, because I don't care. But
mm,
if you find something you actually care about, you're more willing to apply yourself and put the effort in. So I think finding something early which differentiates you a little bit maybe from the market, but also, you're going to get invested and really interested in that. I think that's just a useful tool to keep learning and stick at it. So I think as soon as you get bored, you'll give up.
yeah,
So I think that's why it's important. Yeah.
yeah, nice, nice. So, I've actually got your WordPress is still available online, isn't it? So people can actually go and see that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what to say, like I say, kind of 10 years old. So I wanted to ask you, Tom, is there any kind of firstly, can you remember like the first thing you posted, like your first visual, or is there a memorable one that kind of did a little bit better, like kind of got a bit more traction? Anything that you remember like that?
Yeah, I think I did a piece on like Aston Villa's crossing under Tim Sherwood that definitely sticks in my mind. I remember the coffee shop I was sat in when I was writing that weirdly. And then I also did a piece. I think my first piece ever was about a player called Lee Win, who was like a number 10 for New England Revolution. And yeah, I think writing about like again really really basic data, but about him. Some of the more memorable stuff I've kind of done like later on down the line, but probably the one that really blew up. And again, this is the kind of in between like purely doing data writing, but also trying to do a bit of more general writing about football to kind of grow an audience. So I did a background essentially on when Brentford were coming up from League One to the Champ, what their kind of backroom staff looked like, and the profiles of the people they had on staff. And I was writing a bit of it, I think, around like sporting directors as well. And I think that if you can be really narrow in your thinking around just like data and football, and that's useful to a point. But I think to have an impact at a football club or the media or things like that, like I kind of saw it was important to be a bit well-rounded and understand how football, like kind of as a whole, works. So that was another memorable one of just sat there, like, going through Training Ground Guru or LinkedIn profiles, message boards on the Brentford forums, and just trying to like find information out there as well. So that was quite a fun one. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So just going back to the whole kind of economics degree, then I'm curious, Tom, if you would have gone down that route, what do you know what kind of job at the time when you first took the degree would you have looked to do? Like, where would you be now?
Yeah, well, honestly, like no idea. Probably, like I said, would have been some sort of like a lot of like peers and friends on my course went down kind of the banking route, the economics route,
Hmm.
and I think if I wasn't bored stiff the first week of internship, maybe I'd still be down that route now. But yeah, the whole, I just I do think like if we live in parallel universes, I think more often than not, I probably would have just taken this course because I just couldn't deal with it. So yeah, not sure. I think it's interesting now as well because obviously I kind of did economics to then get into football, and I kind of self-taught R at the time. I
Hmm.
did my whole dissertation in R when everyone else was using, I think it's Stata or like a university level software. But now, like you've got data science course at uni. Like that wasn't even a thing for me 10 years ago, which makes me feel really old saying that. But yeah, it's definitely like easier course-wise to get into this stuff now because the path is just like there's data science jobs now, whereas back then there wasn't really.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm curious then, did you actually have a plan at the start, Tom, where, because obviously an economics background like that banking world, there's probably more well-paid jobs in that than in sport, and
Yeah.
still, see, there's lots of underpaid jobs in sport. So what was your thinking on that? Did that worry you in the fact that you're going to cut off some good opportunities on that side? Obviously, you look,
Yeah.
so
Not
whereas,
necessarily. I think my mind was set clear fairly early on that like I'd rather get paid less in something I enjoy than get paid more in something that I can't stand.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, that was honestly clear quite early. And I just wasn't interested enough in any of that stuff. Like really, my degree was fine, and I enjoyed it for the analytical skills, but the field of economics itself, like I was really not interested in even after 1 year. So yeah, it was just football the whole way through after that. Yeah.
yeah. No, that because I think, like I say, going back to the question I get asked a lot is how do I get in, especially if I don't have a degree in sport. Do I need a degree in sport to do it? I think obviously you're a perfect example that you don't if you have other things to back that up, like you said, a
Mm.
WordPress, a blog. But if you can
Yeah.
back up your skills, then at the end of the day, when you're going for these jobs or whatever, like if you can just prove that you've got the skills that will benefit that club or that organization or whatever it is,
Yeah.
I don't think it matters where. I'm sure you probably agree with that anyway. Like being
Yeah,
past
completely.
that.
Like I've obviously kind of been in a position now in my career as well where I've gone from being hired to being the one who's doing the hiring. So when
Yeah.
you're sat in that seat, obviously you see the position that people have been in when they were hiring you way back. And maybe it's different for them, but for me, like I don't really care if people have a degree or not. Like you can show competence in the things that we really need through, you can self-certificate on open university. I guess it's a degree of is a degree, but also like there's a lot of free online courses out there now as well.
Mm.
And it's just less of a requirement, I think. I think it's more showing like if you can self-teach yourself things and have evidence you can do those things, like a degree, it doesn't necessarily matter in that situation. It's like it's a nice to have, and maybe for certain roles, your better data scientists maybe will be the ones who could have a master's or a PhD, but
Mm.
that doesn't stop anyone who's not got the funding to do a master's or a PhD to be able to actually gain the same skills and have the same level of intelligence. So yeah, far less of a blocker really. I'm much more interested in the softer skills that people have, and then also if two people have one has a degree, one doesn't, and they both got equally good technical skills, then what does the degree matter in that
Yeah,
sense?
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
definitely. Yeah, we'll talk a bit more about that later, actually, because I've got that written down in terms of the hiring process and what you might look for other than the data skills itself. So,
yeah,
in terms of then, want to ask you, Tom, the differences between different roles within data within football. So, like a data analyst, data scientist. What other roles are there, and what are the differences mainly between like an analyst, a scientist, and engineer, and all this sort of stuff?
yeah. So I'd say a data scientist really is someone who's building models, building platforms. Sometimes like it's a bit the natural like what a data scientist does in other industries compared to what they do in football is very, very different.
Yeah.
And I think data scientist is a bit of a catch-all term for like someone who can build reports and code, can build dashboards, can build metrics, can probably do a level of data engineering. Like it's a bit of a jack of all trades kind of role at a lot of clubs. So I'd say, for different clubs, a data scientist means different things. Like for me, very much my forte is more of the visualization side, more of the building kind of pipelines from a database to build outputs, less so the data engineering side. And that's something I kind of like added later. So that's more, it depends club to club and context to context of what they need. Data analyst, I'd say, is more of an end user who's using the tools that a scientist has built. They're maybe doing a bit of analysis themselves from the raw data, but maybe not that in depth. And to be honest with you, a lot of them that I've met are more likely to kind of like use the stats from IQs of the world or just like using tableaus that have been built from someone else or their building. So maybe less proficient and confident on the coding skill side of things. And then data engineer is the one who doesn't really touch the like frontline analysis. They're not delivering work. What they're delivering is they're taking APIs from different providers. They're maybe doing some web scraping and putting it in a database, which can then be used by all these other consumers, I guess, of
Yeah.
their work. So yeah, the roles are all fairly different. And like I said, again, in clubs, again, like a data scientist in club A versus club B could be doing radically different things depending on the needs.
Yeah, and so some recent previous guests who have had, which we'll kind of touch upon, obviously linked to Analytics FC, but like Jeremy Analytics FC, we've got Tim at Market Research, like the consultancy. So I'm just kind of curious to know more about the whole landscape because some clubs obviously have in-house analysts, some have more than others, obviously down to money. Some will purely send it out to a consultancy. So so there's lots of different ways that clubs work it, and I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that, Tom, in terms of maybe how that's changed and how basically why do clubs do the outsourcing and what's the benefits and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the main reasons, honestly, is like clubs sometimes don't know who they want to hire or what they want them to do. Like you've got like a head of technical recruitment, you might have a recruitment analyst and some scouts. They
Mm,
know like a data scientist could potentially help them in certain things, but they don't specifically know what.
yeah.
They don't know what to look for. Maybe their budget isn't that high. So I think that's where you get like a gap in the market for a consultancy who can essentially plug that gap. You don't have to look after a member of staff.
Yeah.
They can, go in, understand the needs, and then deliver, and deliver a level of expertise and experience that it doesn't take like a couple of months or years to get to what the club needs.
Mm,
It's like almost delivering value like very quickly. Um, and then for other ones, maybe they have a department, but they kind of need a bit of guidance. They need a bit of support in terms of, um, again, kind of what does best practice look like, or what's worked really well in other contexts, and how can we kind of like bring that in from outside essentially to help us go from, for some new departments, how do we go from year zero to year two, like
mm,
essentially in less than a year's time? How do we
mm,
speed up development and make sure we're building things the right way? So that's why they do it. And then others, it's purely they don't really want someone to come in and build dashboards, and they don't really want someone to come in and help them do reports. They just want shortlisted players. So it's like, okay, well, I can pay a consultancy to give me really like tight, good quality shortlist of players, which we can then just give to our video scouts and our live scouts,
yeah.
and they will do a lot of the work for us. So I think there's a few different reasons, and then obviously depends on club budget, size, ambition, why they would do one of those maybe three things.
Yeah. Yeah, so I remember when I was at, again, going back 10 years, when I was at Brighton in their analyst department, obviously Chairman Brighton, Tony Bloom, was kind of into the betting and all that stuff. So there was many times like that we would get things in from like he obviously had his own team of analysts, like they would
Yeah.
do some work, the project would come in and it's like, oh, this is from the chairman's guys, like, and they were based somewhere else. So yeah, it was quite interesting to see how much actually going on. I mean, moving forward, Tom, do you think more eventually clubs will just bring it all in house, or will there still be a need for all of this kind of consultancy?
Yeah, I think there will always kind of be a need because when teams go through transition, and definitely one of the biggest things you probably see in the industry is like teams will bring in a data scientist who'll work there for 2 or 3 years, and then he'll get another job and go elsewhere. And unless there's been like the nature of clubs is so volatile and fast paced and day to day, unless you've got really solid working practices in place, and you're building stuff in the right way where if I leave tomorrow, someone else can come in and kind of like pick up the baton. That doesn't always happen at clubs. So there's a lot of clubs where, you hear about someone's been there for a few years, they leave, the lights get turned off, but the code's still sat there.
Mm,
Whereas obviously with the consultancy, you don't have to worry about like if a consultancy loses a data scientist, like they still have to provide a level of service. So I still think there's a natural amount of transition in football, and data scientists and data science within clubs isn't the work's not always formalized in a way where it can just be picked up by the next person. If that happens, you need to plug the gap with the consultancy. And
mm,
then also, I guess we're seeing it maybe makes more economical sense for some clubs to just pay a consultancy what they would pay a data scientist, an analyst, and an engineer, get the same outputs for probably like a competitive rate, have more support, things like that. Like I think there is a case to say that consultancies bring you a level of work which is probably higher,
mm.
um, at a lower cost, and that again it's a good pitch really to a lot of clubs.
Yeah. I suppose, especially as well, like if the club is kind of new to using data, like they probably don't know what, like you said, they don't know what they need. They don't really know how to hire at that kind of position because they've never done it before.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the other thing as well is when you hire an analyst, they'll go through certain learnings and make mistakes, and that's how they kind of get better and improve. But it takes time to do that. There's no real way to speed that up unless you bring people in who've kind of been through the wall already and kind of have already done all those things. They kind of understand the data sets they're working with inside and out. And again, it's just speeding up some of those things. So whether you can use that to speed up the training of your internal staff to get to the level of some who've been around the industry for a long period of time, or just like the level of work will be will be a level which your department would get to, but maybe in 1 to 3 years time.
Okay, so I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far, but I have a quick interruption just to tell you a little bit more about the sponsor of today's video, the APFA, or the Association of Professional Football Analysts. As I mentioned, this is an organisation created by analysts for analysts, and they're doing a great job in supporting people working within the industry. So if you are a football analyst, you are probably already aware of the APFA, which is great, and that probably has a lot to do with their incredible jobs board. So if there is a football club or a team or organisation from anywhere around the world that is looking to hire for a football analyst, the chances are those jobs will be listed on the APFA jobs board. So it's really interesting to see the diversity of the jobs actually, because I've seen a lot more niche roles over the last few months. So there's loads of different roles that are available now within football analysis. So if you are looking for your next position, or maybe your first position, you should definitely check out the jobs board that is on the APFA website. So another good thing about the APFA is their educational content. So as I mentioned, the whole community is built by analysts. So the courses that they are able to deliver are very specific to the roles and responsibilities that you'll face as a football analyst. So for example, they have a post-match analysis course, they've got an individual player analysis course, and they've also got an opposition analysis course. So 3 great ones there, but having spoken to the guys at the APFA recently, I know they are working on some more really good ones actually, so definitely check those out if you're looking to enhance your knowledge and become more employable in the world of football analysis. So because they are a sponsor, they've kindly allowed a 10% discount for any viewers of my channel. So there is a link down below the video in the description. So you can click that link to go direct to their website. You can check out the jobs board, see if there's anything on there for you. And then the courses, as I mentioned, you do get 10% off if you use code GIL10. So that's GILL 10. GIL10 to get 10% off any course that is listed on the APFA website. So thanks again to the APFA for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to the conversation. Yeah. Nice. So that leads us on to Analytics FC then. So am I right in saying this did just start with was it a podcast that you started?
Well, my WordPress site was actually called Analytics FC, and then when we changed to the consultancy, I had to change it and give it some rubbish name like Worville Analysis. So yeah, that's where that came from. But yeah, how that started, so that was my blog, and then yeah, I guess the 3 analysts I mentioned earlier. So Sam Gregory, who now works at US Soccer, Bobby Gardner, who works for AC Milan, and Ben Torvany, who works for a consultancy in the space. We kind of like started talking on Twitter. Sam was still in Canada, I think, at the time. Bobby and Ben at uni in London, and we started like chatting. Went for like beers a few times. Sam moved over to London to do a master's, and we all kind of got really close and started like posting together. Then we were like, right, it's probably better for us to consolidate all of our separate blogs under one thing. So we started doing that. And then we also had the idea of like, right, let's see if we can make a go at this as a consultancy. So we'd jump in my banged up Ford Fiesta and drive around to clubs around the country, essentially saying like, look, we'll take your Optadata. Clubs at that time didn't have anyone on staff who could write code, right? So they're getting these F24 XMLs from Opta and all these files, which you can't work with unless you can code, essentially. Yeah. And we were turning that into insights. So we went to one championship club, kind of hosted there for half a day. We looked at discussing pre and post match analysis reports. This is back in 2015, I think, using data, and then also did some recruitment shortlists for them. They were looking for a number 6 midfielder. And yeah, went through and discussed it, and they were like really happy with the work. And at that time, they were quite, I'd say, forward thinking and open around using data and making the most out of it. And so, some people from the staff of that club at this point have like gone on to do like really good things within football. So definitely had like a good amount of open-mindedness and interest in data. Essentially, the club, we had like a small deal lined up. It would have been like our first deal in the space, which would have been amazing. And then I think from that, we were like, we could maybe try and turn this into a bit of a startup, bit of a business. The club lost in the playoffs, and then all this, manager gets sacked, staff leave, plug gets fully pulled from the deal. So that's football, that's life. But that is kind of where we went from just a blog to then doing the blog, and me and Sam were doing the podcast, and then we're like, right, we think there's a space and a growing space for like consultancy side, and nearly took off. Sliding doors moment, I'd say, with that.
I mean, I probably didn't even know what a podcast was in 2014, 2015. So like, it's quite very early that you did it back then. So in terms of then, what was the plan then, just to effectively just offer your services to clubs on that kind of consultancy basis and kind of use your skills altogether to do that was the business plan at the time.
Yeah, essentially, it wasn't anything more, yeah, smart or strategic than right. One of you can grab the data, the other one can visualize it, the other one can write a report, and the other one can kind of deliver it, and that's kind of what it was. Nowhere near as mature as obviously the space now, where consultancies are providing platforms and APIs and stuff like that. But yeah, and that's I guess we like through myself and the guys met Jeremy Steele back then, and Jeremy was working for a company called Double Pass, but was really interested in this space, and it was just kind of like growing and starting out. And then yeah, we formalized the business. Jeremy took a stake alongside all of us. And then yeah, Analytics FC kind of we moved on to do other things, work for other companies, and then it kind of became Jeremy's baby from there, I guess. And Jeremy grew it into what is I think like the right path, which is build a platform, build some really smart, interesting models, hit a price point in the market which is affordable for a lot of clubs,
Mm.
and just keep kind of like innovating from there. So it's been really cool to see like the trajectory of that company when it was just like one which I'd started in my bedroom at uni with some mates. So it's yeah, cool to see.
Perfect, nice. So if anyone does want to see, I'll link that below. Obviously, Jeremy's been on the podcast recently and kind of talked all around that, what they do and stuff like that. So yeah, it's interesting to hear from one of the guys that started it really. So perfect. So like I say, I've got your LinkedIn profile up as well, Tom. So we're going to kind of jump to and from different roles and stuff. So after that one, I'm looking at stats perform. So I'm just want to know a little bit more about that. So firstly, how did that come about? Like, was that on the back of maybe your portfolio? Was it just a standard job application? And what were you doing in that particular role to start with?
Yeah, so I guess it was like a optimal hiring for data scientists. They just had one who had left Sam Green to go and join Aston Villa. So they kind of had some people internally doing a bit in sport, but they wanted to really start to, they had all this data in football. They weren't really doing anything with it. So what can we
Yeah.
do with it? So yeah, put the application out. I applied. Sam Gregory, who I was working with at Analytics FC, he applied, and we both joined in the summer of 2016. I think that would have been. And that role very much was like pretty open-ended at the start, trying to understand the football data landscape. And it was more on the media side, I'd say, to start with than with clubs.
Yeah.
Clubs were taking some data, but I don't really think they were doing much with it. There weren't overly many who you'd say are like as data driven as they are today. But the first remit in the first couple of years was build and launch the first expected goals model in football, like to the public.
Yeah, yeah.
It's definitely things that were kind of floating around privately, and Michael Cayley had a model, and Colin Trainer had a model, and these other like initial analysts in the space had stuff, but no one like a data provider had packaged it up and sold it. So first 6 months was spent building the model, tweaking it, trying to get people on board. And that it takes a lot of work because at that point, no one's really, they don't really get it. They don't really understand why you need it. Remember one meeting with the BBC up in Manchester, and we kind of showed it to them and said what it can do. And the feedback was like, well, can't you just take like shots in the 6 yard box instead? Like, why do you need XG and all this? And it's like, well, you need the context and it can tell you other stories. So there was a lot of very similar conversations with people in similar roles at media and clubs and things like that. But that was the first like remit for the first 2 years, I'd say, which was really fun. And as you can see, it was pretty successful because XG is used everywhere now at this point.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay then. So, from how does XG look now? Like the differences between how XG looks now to then, Tom. What are the main differences, developments, etc.
Yeah, I think so. To start with, it was just like the model type used. It was like a more simple modeling approach back then, just a kind of regression, I guess. And now it's much more involved, kind of like neural networks they use instead, or a neural network approach. And then it's also the factors. So, we were looking at angle to the goal, distance from the goal, whether it was from a cross, whether it was a header, whether it was a foot. But now you've got like pressure on the shot, you've got players in between the shot and the goal. Um, you've got, assist type, which I actually don't think is like a massive factor when you take into account those things. You've then also got kind of post shot XG is a lot better. So you've got like velocity of the shot, you've got placement in the goal, you've got goalkeeper position. So it's just adding more things to the model to make it more accurate, so it doesn't really have any blind spots. And at the start with our whole thing was like, don't look at individual XG of individual chances because there's a lot of context and information that the model was missing at that point.
Yeah.
Whereas now, stats will have their freeze frames and we'll happily talk about XG on an individual shot basis. So there's definitely a step forward of the quality of the model and how accurate it is.
Yeah. So, two questions on that on the back of that, Tom. So, What else can be added to make it better than it is now? Is it done? Will it ever be done? Like what, in terms of making it more accurate and more insightful?
Yeah, I don't think it'll ever be done. I think the thing that people are always crying out for is like some sort of player adjustment. So
Mm.
the XG of a chance for Heung-min Son is different to that for, I don't know, William Saliba from the same shot in the same situation because, one is clinical off both feet, good ball striker, the other's a centre back who doesn't necessarily score goals. So I think that's the next thing, but that's very the way that it's been done so far is a lot of kind of like Bayesian approaches where you have essentially fat confidence intervals around. We think that Heung-min Son's a really good finisher, but like it's not like we can say for certain, but we have um, we think he is with a big level of confidence intervals around it. And I think that necessarily doesn't really lend itself that well to just like people saying, well, like, is he a good finisher or not? So that's one thing. I think, to be honest with you, there are maybe some like smaller things in terms of like pressure and movement of players against the ball and things like that. But honestly, I think it's probably in quite a steady state at this point, and
Yeah.
every advancement from this is marginal. Like the biggest
Mm.
gains we've made in quality of the XG model have already happened.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, cool. And then one of the things you said earlier was neural network. So what do you mean by that, and what is that? Explain it to an idiot like me.
I think someone's gonna have to explain it to an idiot like me first. But no, it's a like approach in data science that you can use a modeling approach which looks at different relationships in a data set, and essentially can help you make predictive models. And it's one of those where it's a black box. So with a regression, I can tell you exactly how much the distance from goal impacts the XG, whereas with a neural network, it's not overly as clear as like pulling out that for an individual factor or an individual shot at times. So yeah, it's just a way of modeling something to give you more accurate outputs to the other side.
Yeah.
It's the best way I'd explain it.
Okay, perfect. So you went as a data scientist, and then according to your profile, you were doing that, and then you were then senior data analyst. So a little promotion at that role.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of hit the point where my modeling skills were okay, but my interest was more in how can I build visuals and build tables and essentially build stories and deliver those to a lot of media clients, but also league offices and clubs who we're working with. So Opto at the time was trying to move more into the consultancy space themselves.
Mm.
So I was like wanting to be a part of that. And I managed a couple of analysts, Johnny Whitmore and Peter McKeever. So both still at the company. Peter's gone on to become an excellent kind of web developer. And Johnny's kind of taken my role there, leading a team of analysts himself, and working a lot with Premier League media providers, etc., with essentially giving them stories, giving them content, really.
Yeah, perfect. So next on the list then, the Athletic, Tom. So this obviously is something a little bit different. So you've kind of done that kind of consultancy, obviously the data provider. Now you're into the media. So same kind of question for this in terms of how did this come about, and was there any kind of hesitations of moving into the media route? Because obviously I'm sure Stats Perform have those links to the clubs, whereas the media maybe not so, and it's a different kind of setting altogether.
Yeah. So this honestly came about from yeah, fancied doing something different. The Athletic was just starting out, and I just sent a cold email to the managing editor and just said, look, like, really impressed by the work you've guys done. No one else in this space has got like a full-time data writer on staff.
Mm.
Um, Here's what I can offer. Like, here's an example of some pieces. I wrote an example piece. I just said, like, would love to see what you think about this and where this lands. And I just got a single. It's like classic. You send like a big body of work to someone who's in like a powerful, prestigious position, and you get like a one-line reply. It was like, let's meet for a cuppa. And I was like, okay. So then met, and I was going to the Athletic offices probably once every 2 weeks just to get an update. I was hammering emails every day, like what's going on, blah blah blah.
Mm.
And yeah, effectively they saw the value clearly, so I got the job in the end. And saw what it could bring, but weren't really sure whether this was going to be like a minor role and a small part of the company. But I guess what it turned out to a little bit was like every writer was craving data really, and every single writer wanted to have a different angle to their stories, and data became a lot more of a bigger part of the offering, both in terms of like bespoke data pieces, which I did a piece on. Um, a lot of questions I've always had in my head about football and football data, which I didn't really have a platform to write, and I would have written about if I was, blogging at the time with access to the data. Things about like pass clustering to show how Liverpool passed their way to the title. Things about crossing and crossing analytics, which I think was kind of underserved and probably is still underserved by the market in terms of the event data providers. loads of different things, to be honest with you. So yeah, turned out from a cold email to a very fun role, which was cool. Yeah.
Nice, perfect. So, and how did that work, Tom? Were you working with the other writers, your data skills helping them? Were you given a quota as to how much you needed to write in terms of pumping these articles out? How did
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, a bit of a mix. So it was to start with, it was 3 pieces a week, and you can kind of, as long as you agree with your editor, the deadlines and things were fairly flexible. We also had like a data request channel. So using Slack, you'd have Arsenal writers saying, "I'm doing a piece on Martin Odegaard, have these questions, blah blah blah," and then you go away and do some research and provide them like a stat pack and some visuals that I build out. Then there was the podcast, which is still going, the Athletic Tactics Pod with Michael Cox. And then as well at the time trying to build out YouTube. That came a bit later on, but they obviously took over TIFO. So there was the TIFO angle as well. So there was a kind of a lot of things to kind of work around. And yeah, it was mainly just like how to balance all that really. But the data request channel was really hot, and a lot of, like I said, a lot of writers wanted data. So working closely with them was it was cool. And you had different levels of data literacy. You had some who understood it, you could send them some stuff, they'd use it perfectly in their copy and it's fine. And others where they just take your notes and just like paste them in the body of the article, and it's like, okay, then
Yeah,
an editor's got to go away and clean it up a bit more. So but it did definitely teach me a bit more around how to communicate with different audience, people with different data literacy. How do you translate when, I don't know, a Carl Anker like understands data, so comes to you with like a specific question, but another writer, you've kind of got to pass from what they're saying, what they need, and then deliver it back to them. So yeah, it was a really good learning in translation and communication of data, really.
yeah, yeah. I think that's important because it's kind of a different, or it's more of like a mainstream audience that these things are going out to kind of. So it has got to be, more, easier to kind of digest and understand. So,
Yeah.
in terms of then, obviously that was a full-time job, Tom. But in terms of like opportunities for people that maybe want to kind of, freelance. Obviously, that a lot of people do freelance now. So would you say that that's a viable kind of thing to do in terms of, let's say I'm an analyst and I'm not employed specifically by a club, but I might consult with a club for a certain thing over there. I might do this. I might do some articles for a news outlet. Is that, in terms of
Yeah.
that kind of paid per article, is that a thing? Like, is there a market for that?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I'm not sure on like the economics of it in terms of like how well paid it is, how viable it is to like fully go down that route. But I've definitely seen people, do pieces for analytics. I've seen get paid, do pieces for FOTMob and other sites. So I definitely think that the work is kind of there. In terms of like consulting with clubs, I've only ever really seen that unless it's through a consultancy to go fully freelance. It's mainly through, relationships that you've built with people at the clubs. Doesn't necessarily seem like they have a lot of freelance data analysts, maybe in the same way that they'd have like a part-time scout. We're not really there yet. So I think more on the writing side than the club side.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so brilliant. Right, let's go to the next role then, Tom. So we've scouting data scientist, Red Bull Leipzig. So again, how did it come about? What's the differences? Because you got a little mixed bag going here, Tom. So
Yeah,
through this
yeah,
one.
sure. Yeah, so yeah, came about just essentially I kept in contact with someone who works in the department who I met at a conference, and he called me up one day and just said like, look, we're looking for someone, just trying to speak to a few people to gauge interest. The ad's going up next week. Just to kind of heads up and see where you're at. And I kind of hit a bit of a saturation point where I'd probably written every type of article I wanted to write at the Athletic, and answered every kind of data request that had come my way. So I was looking definitely to cut my teeth a bit at a club, and there are probably a few better opportunities than working for RB Leipzig. So I thought, I'm gonna give it a try. Had an application go in, sent some code, and then had a few rounds of interviews, and then flew out there to go and visit the club, and kind of had like a final stage interview. And I was at a point in life, single, no real responsibilities, ready to, during COVID, ready to maybe get outside and see something new. So I kind of took the leap really. So I moved over there in November of 2021, and was just based purely in the scouting team. So it was me, all the kind of like different video scouts, end scouts, etc., scouting coordinator, and the head of the department. And then amazing role really, just kind of going in and being able to have carte blanche ownership of how RB Leipzig uses data to scout players using whatever data sets we kind of needed, with a pretty big budget for these things. And fantastic boss, fantastic people who are extremely smart and good at what they do. And it was a real kind of university education of how to scout and think about football. So yeah, it was a really fantastic experience, really.
Nice. Off-topic question, a bit selfish. I'm going to Leipzig this year, in
Nice.
about next month for the Euro. So, what's it like, Tom? Give me any recommendations for some bars
Yeah,
or something?
it's nice. Yeah, there's a pizza place called 60 Seconds to Napoli, which I've frequented a lot, which I'd highly recommend. There's some streets and bars not too far away, but honestly, it's a really nice town, like a town city. It's not the biggest. It's definitely worth like one of the days you're there, just walk the whole thing. Like it's
Mm,
possible. It's a lot of nice green space. If you're there for a few days and the weather's nice, there's a few lakes. They call them seas over there, but
mm,
essentially like you're at the beach and you're in the middle of like in the middle of Germany. That's what it feels like. So those are like a cycle ride away, 25 minutes from the center. So yeah, highly recommend Leipzig. It's a lovely place.
nice, perfect. Yeah, I've got a couple of days there, so I'll check out the pizza place.
Are you going to a game, the Euros,
No,
or?
I've not managed to get any tickets, so I'm still
Okay.
on the lookout. Yeah, I tried so many applications in the ballots, but nothing yet. But never know. There's still time yet. There's still time.
Nice.
Perfect. So let's get back to the conversation. So in terms of then, you touched a little bit on it there, Tom, the department itself. So who
Yeah.
else was in that department in terms of the different roles, and how did the data side integrate with like the traditional scouts going out to watch games? How did all that fit together?
Yeah, sure. So I won't touch too much on the department setup, just because I think they're still quite watertight on how that looks like. But it was I'd say, very data driven in the way that the names that came into we had a really like clear process where like names would be flagged using data, using the different tools that we build with the different data sets. They then get assigned to scouts, and the scouts will do the work.
Mm,
So it wasn't any notion of kind of scouts picking their own games. And again, when I talk about earlier, um, departments kind of like learning and making mistakes and doing all those things within data and trying to get to like a point where they're like ahead in the field or doing something that's more cutting edge. Like I think the Department of Leipzig, because it was probably only, the club's only 10, 15 years old, the department's a similar age.
mm,
Everyone in the department, bar a couple, were 30 and below. It isn't in the office. Some of the field scouts are a bit older. But you definitely had that like openness and openness to mistakes, and they'd clearly gone through a lot of um, mistakes over the years and made a lot of learnings and learned from those. So there's just a lot of things that the department did, which I think was like are not done by
mm,
departments in the UK now, and they're just very, yeah, absolutely top of their game, really. So it meant I could go in, start building models, building ways of flagging players and getting them directly into the process. And there was no friction in doing that. There was no issue in doing that. There was no pushback because they saw the value straight away. And maybe I'm still trying to work out, is it a Germany thing? Is it a Leipzig thing? I think it's probably more of a Red Bull and more of a Leipzig thing than potentially just like Germany per se. But definitely that's a difference maybe between that and the UK market where the culture at clubs here um, isn't as it's not that they're not open to data, but they're like fully on it in Germany, whereas here it's still getting to that point.
yeah. Okay. Cool. So in this hypothetical, obviously, without giving too many secrets away, but just in terms of the process of identifying a player, would the data be used for that initially? So let's say you're in the club, Tom, and how does it look from, okay, this guy looks like he might, the numbers are showing this guy's interesting. What happens from there? Like, where does it go?
Yeah, so kind of build out a similar to a lot of clubs like have understanding of like, right, what is it we're looking for? How do we effectively measure things to flag players that do those things? And then having a process where you can put players into a system that they then can kind of get churned through and watched by the various scouts. So it's just having very formalized processes and stuff in the calendar weekly to do certain things and just churn through the work in a very standardized fashion, really. It's quite dry, but that's just
Yeah.
how it kind of works.
Okay, so I hope you're enjoying the video so far, but I have a really quick interruption for anybody with an interest in video analysis. So if that's you, please do click the link down below the video for In Play Online. So just to give a quick overview, because I think it'll be relevant to a lot of people that are watching this particular video. So In Play Online is a cloud-based video analysis software. So it allows you to tag your videos, and when you've done your tagging, that includes adding labels, adding comments, adding notes and voice notes even, and you can even illustrate and draw over your clip. So if you are an aspiring analyst looking for your job and you want to create a portfolio of work, If you're a scout looking to make your kind of reports a little bit better and more animated, if you're a coach looking to get into analysis a little bit more, then this tool will be great for you because it starts at just £15 a month. So once you've done your analysis, you can add all the clips to different playlists, which can be downloaded and exported offline. You can put them into presentations and also share them to different people within your team. So it comes with a whole bunch of other features, but I'll let you click the link down below if you are interested. As I say, packages start at just £15 a month, so it's a very affordable solution if you are looking for something to help with your video analysis. So that's it for the interruption. Let's get back to the video. Yeah, I mean, is there any kind of doubt or fear that, once more clubs doing this, and obviously all you guys in terms of data scientists, you're using the same kind of skills. I know not everyone's looking for the same player, but is there a fear that, it gets to the point where it does kind of almost get to that, where a lot of teams are just finding the same players and looking at the same players? So
yeah, 100%. See that a lot now, to be honest with you. In conversations with friends, peers, colleagues, and kind of day to day. So there's definitely like the edge previously was use data because no one was using data.
yeah,
The edge now is how can you think differently? And again, like we've come a bit full circle, like how do you find your niche in finding certain profiles or finding undervalued players in the market or players with less of a data footprint? I definitely think everyone focuses on if they've got probably StatsBomb or Impact and Skill Corner or some level of broadcast tracking data. You're largely everyone's looking at the same pool, like you say, of players, but there are players that are still on those clubs that fall out of that. And those for me are the ones where you can find value in the market. It's the backup striker who had a really good data footprint at his previous club. His current club, he can't get on the pitch, so he's not coming up in your searches at the moment for this season. But maybe 2 seasons ago, he was really interesting. And if he's training every day and he's still part of the traveling group and he's making the bench, he's probably fit enough. He's maybe not like match sharp, but there's still a good enough level of like that player's not disappeared. He's not gone.
yeah,
So how can you be creative with the data to and then a lot of that is not necessarily being creative with the data, it's being creative with your scouting and recruitment strategy, really. Like what is your market and how do you hit those markets right? And I think that's something that Leipzig have very clear red lines on age, on profile, things like this. I think we're starting to see some clubs are a bit like that now. Brighton and Brentford are like the obvious ones, but I still think maybe even like Sunderland as well are another one who've maybe gone a bit too far, but they've got clear. They signed a lot of young players from academies and second teams for less than £1 million, and they're making bets essentially, and some will come off and some won't. But I really like that because they've got a clear strategy in the market, and that's how you punch above your weight as a football club.
yeah. I don't know if you knew that Sunderland's my team, so I don't know if you brought that, but it's just random. But yeah, because I also feel like that in terms of looking at the same pool of players, but I think that's kind of added to that is that I think a lot more teams are playing the same similar way. You don't,
Yeah.
just my opinion from the outside in terms of you used to get a lot more variation in playing styles. I feel, and I
Yeah.
don't know if you agree with that or is it?
No, I fully agree. I think it just feels like everyone now is trying to do 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 inverted wingers, and the roles of players seem to be the same, and that's why I think having your Barnsleys, having your Lutons, having your Nottingham Forest, who for some reason like they probably almost probably want to play that way if they could because of budget and things like that, but they can't.
Yeah,
Having spoken to a lot more coaches recently, like a lot of them are so wedded to like their principles and the way that they want to play the game, without maybe thinking of like bit rock paper scissors, like those are your principles, or what's actually the right way to beat that? Because playing the same way with inferior players probably isn't
yeah, yeah,
the right approach. So I would agree. I think to us who watching football 5-6 years ago was probably more entertaining than it is now. I don't know if that's might be a commonly held opinion from people, but it just feels that the game is more static and controlled now. Maybe that's because it's more tactically um, uh, proficient, for lack of a better term. The analysis is better, the players are better, the coaching's better. Maybe that's the natural evolution of where football gets to. But yeah, I would tend to agree, and I think thinking differently, playing differently is it's smart for teams when you're fighting on budget and things like that. It's the right way to go about it.
yeah. Perfect. So I'm going to chuck in a question from Liam Headshaw. Shout out to Liam. He popped a question in, which was a good one. So I'll read it out word for word because it's kind of covers what we've spoke about already, Tom. So having worked at a club, a data provider, in the media, and now for a consultancy group, how have you found the transition between those roles? What are the different challenges and the skills that you've used across those roles?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the thing that's consistent throughout is the need to communicate, but to different audiences. So how do you tweet your message? How do you tweet your approach to someone at a club and their domain? Obviously, more often than not, is going to be, scouting players. Someone in the media, it's obviously similar. We talk about scouting a lot. We talk about player metrics, player performance, etc. But it's got to be in a way that like my dad can understand it. So it's like changing it slightly, being a bit less technical. And then on the consultancy side, it's probably more akin to the club stuff. But at Prospects, we do a lot of work, more detailed advanced models than I probably have worked with before. So it's how do you then bring that back down from like a level of complexity and kind of data speak down to a level which is back to how do we talk about football in a way that people at clubs will understand and see the value. So communications like excuse me, like the first one, and then probably presentation as well has been the consistent thing for me throughout. That my first port of call at every place I've worked at, because I've obviously been in the technical data role there, has been right. Let's build out like what the theme is for what the data viz is going to look like. So at Opta, it's like where do you put the logo? What's the branding? What the colors, fonts? Like what does it look like? Before I started the Athletic, 2 weeks before, I literally sat in my room building out the templates for what things are going to look like going forwards.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things in these kind of roles where you almost like set the direction with these things and then you don't really touch them. And once you've got those in place, you're not iterating and tweaking and changing. You're actually just spending your time like getting better at other sides of the job. So that was definitely a clear one of set that like visual identity, brand identity, etc. And then just once you build that as like a common visual language for if you're presenting tables, if you're presenting analysis like that, that just help people like when they understand or they see a chart or something, like they just get used to seeing it, things like that.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing is probably just around to be fair, it all comes back to communication and with different audiences. And sometimes you can be really technical with the clubs, other times it's a bit more high level with the media. And it's just knowing how to do that with different stakeholders, really. I think that's the main takeaway, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Is there an audience you prefer to deliver your message to, Tom? Like the mainstream guy or the chairman, or like which one do you
I
prefer?
think I think the most interesting for me, probably like on a intellectual basis, is more of your old school scouts sometimes, so your scouts who've been in the game a long time, because they offer a lot of value in how they see things. And I think honestly, I think I say this sentence every single day, but like everyone in football sees the game probably roughly the same way,
Mm.
but we just talk about it differently. So like we have different words for the same things, and getting people aligned and seeing that when I say a deep line playmaker, you mean a quarterback or whatever it means, like try and get everyone on the same page, but then also understand what the things which when I'm presenting data on a player to a scout, like what of high what has he seen that I'm missing and vice versa. I always find that quite interesting. And I feel more often than not, it's just stuff that's like kind of lost in translation. It's not like the data's wrong. It's not really often that. It's more that it's not being aligned on like what the scout needs to look for. Uh, there are obviously sometimes where it's like, okay, the model needs to be tweaked, or the way the data's presented needs to be tweaked because of something the scout's seen, etc. But yeah, I think those are the most interesting. I kind of find go towards the end of the media stuff, it is interesting, but you're just trying to condense everything down to like that one nugget, that one
Mm.
stat.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think football's a bit too nuanced for that at times. So that's a bit difficult for me. So yeah, definitely the football people who've lived in the game and thought about the game a lot, I find speaking with those guys the most enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. So you touched upon it a little bit there. So we'll get to Prospect, Tom. So you are head of football at Prospect, and I
Yeah.
think I said to you before we start recording, I purposely left this one blank. I haven't researched it. I want you to kind of explain it, and what do you guys do there? What's the purpose of your role?
Yeah, of course. So I'll give a bit of background on Prospect. So it was started a few years ago by two guys, James Tozer and Gordon Hamilton Fairley, and they initially were doing work with England Rugby and Eddie Jones from James's Kitchen, but essentially building the probably first ever rugby models based on data and trying to help Eddie win and help England win, win probability models and player models and things like this. Then they expanded that thinking onto cricket, and then they wanted to move into the football space as well, and that's kind of where I came in. So I joined in August of last year, and the remit really is kind of a few things. It's what's the kind of football strategy for the consultancy in the market, um, also leading on kind of business development and how do we move the business forward, working with our kind of internal data science team. So what models are we building? They none of them really have like a background in football, which obviously now have some experience in that market. So how can I kind of direct and nudge the work towards something which kind of passes the smell test, passes the eye test at times, and then delivering stuff directly with clients and being really hands-on with the clubs we work with. So it's quite multifaceted is the nature of a startup. But then, you have a really strong data science team, which is kind of co-located between England and India. A lot of very, extremely smart, technically minded people who are using AI, machine learning, essentially the standard data science toolkit these days, but applied to sport and trying to essentially build the best sports analytics team in the world. And definitely are building some really exciting models, which we're excited to share with the world soon when they're ready. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So is the football side of things, is that working with clubs as your clients? Is it organizations? Is it media? Or is it a mix of everything? Like,
Just honestly, just clubs at the moment. Just because that's what we see. That's been the focus of the company before I arrived. Has always been predominantly on the club side of things, and I think that's where um, it's just like the most interesting area of work at the moment. And the nature of what we deliver, help on recruitment, help on analysis, and then a lot of off-field stuff in terms of like wider strategy, club finance, kind of a bit of a one-stop shop for everything that a club does operationally.
mm,
Um, yeah, just that's more of the focus really.
yeah. So because in terms of that, like operational and the finances, like in terms of how clubs use data now, and we'll just go the average Premier League club, let's say. I know you're obviously not working in one right now, but in terms of is there much focus on, because obviously your focus is on the performance, like how the team does and how they recruit players and stuff like that. But obviously, there's data can be used in many, many other ways, as you will know, and you come from that kind of financial background anyway. So
Yeah.
are clubs doing that much in terms of, are there roles out there for people to work with data in sport, but not specifically the performance of the team and recruitment?
Yeah, I think there's still roles, and I'm again not sure because it's not really my area, but there's still definitely seen roles in, ticketing, analytics, some level of like commercial analytics more generally, and clubs are nudging that way. Definitely with Prospect doing some work with in those areas as well, because clubs they don't have those capabilities in house, but it's really important. And when it's related to revenue, if you can increase revenue, put it back into the team, that's obviously going to help performance as well. But to be fair, one of the more interesting things for me is kind of been around squad building and how do you essentially manage a budget for a squad to spend it in a more optimal way across the pitch? And that's been some of the more interesting research. And none of it, honestly, is rocket science, really. How do you make sure that what you're spending on a backup goalkeeper isn't like disproportionate to the amount of time he's going to spend on the pitch?
Mm,
Uh, but like initially building that analysis, developing it further, presenting it to clubs, then getting them to think along those lines has been really like rewarding as a task, and it's definitely something which intrigued to see how other clubs kind of take that on board and are interested in that analysis going forwards, because that's the area in football we've been less able to analyze publicly because there's no public wage data, and that to me is why MLS was initially really interesting. You can do it in most American sports because payroll stuff, whether it's accurate or not, I'm not sure, but payroll for NBA, NFL is public.
mm,
Whereas you can only really do that stuff with a football club if you work for the football club or if you
mm.
work with the football club, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, maybe from the MLS, but is there a particular position, Tom, like a playing position that is not like typically more so undervalued than another position, or one that's typically overvalued? I presume a striker would probably cost more, but I don't know if you
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think definitely strikers are the ones which seemingly all the money goes into, and I guess you can argue somewhat for the right reasons, but I think all of it comes back down a little bit to like the game model of the coach and how he wants to play. And are there certain positions who are getting on the ball less, influencing the game less, so therefore you can probably give a little bit in terms of the quality of that player.
know.
So I don't necessarily think there's one specific position. And I've heard people make the argument in the past that goalkeeper is the main one because they save you the most points, but footballs are like um it's a team sport. So although it's easy to see that a goalkeeper, they make saves, they save goals from going in, save shots from turning into goals even. Um, just because you can't necessarily see the value of other positions like a centre mid doesn't mean that they're not offering nearly as much kind of value there. So I think it depends coach to coach, game model to game model, to be honest with you. Like one of the clubs we work with at the moment, for them, like having a really, really strong fullback is really important. So you're probably going to want to put more of your
Yeah.
weight in the squad, more of your value in the squad at fullback because they have such a pivotal role in how the team plays.
Hmm. Yeah, perfect. So one thing that I noticed that you popped out from Prospect was a piece recently on Liverpool potentially buying a stake or buying a club somewhere else in the world. So I'm quite interested in this. 'Cause I had a recent episode with Jason Stevens, who's a kind of expert on multi-club ownerships and football business stuff. So I found that really interesting. I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole on that. So when I seen this, it was quite interesting. So for those that haven't seen it, Tom, can you just explain a little bit about what the piece actually was and the purpose of that and what it kind of included?
Yeah, so it's just we were kind of spitballing ideas of how can we, I guess, show off from a prospect point of view some of the models we're building, and also some of the ways that obviously like we think and think we know about how football works. And Michael Edwards had recently decided to go back to Liverpool and kind of said as part of his remit in the press release that a second club was important. And so we were kind of chatting one day and saying like, well, like why is that the case? And I think it just makes for an interesting question of like why does a club take on a second club now in this market when and specifically like a second club, not a club group, because we've seen club groups in this space and they've had varying levels of success. And I probably feel that in general, it's more effort than it's worth for a lot of club groups. And actually having just a second club or a sister club or a partner club where you have really strong relationships is the better approach. Um, and so yeah, it's just interesting to discuss that. And we looked at reasons around like scouting, around loan players, why you do it, access to markets, different player pools, and then using our models around you know playing style, some more basic metrics in there, but also team quality as well to be able to see like what's the quality of the league, the team within that league, etc. And then yeah, we're discussing could we use our other models in terms of chance of relegation of these teams and kind of season simulators and things like that. But it was probably a bit too much for this initial piece, which but it was just mainly around kind of how can we flex our muscles a little bit in terms of what we can offer, and also answer a really interesting question, which is what strategically are Liverpool going to do with it, targeting a second club.
Yeah. I'll link the thing underneath the video so people can check it out. So I presume like in that kind of multi-club ownership, clubs can just have, one analytics team that kind of works across various different clubs. I would presume that would obviously save money and make it a bit more efficient.
Yeah, definitely. It's actually something where at Red Bull, it was more club to club, and that's because
Right.
the different nuances of how Brazilian football works and the market that the Brazilian clubs operate in versus New York Red Bulls and MLS, which are very stringent league rules, versus Leipzig in Germany. Like we felt it made more sense to be located specifically in those teams, whereas I think like City Football Group, the 777 group, like those ones have a very clear like group level tier
Yeah.
and deliver things down from there, which is useful. I think if you have a certain level of staff, you can get the best of both worlds with that group level.
Mm.
Uh, but yeah, definitely for Liverpool, they probably go down the route of how can you have um, people at the club, but probably slowly over time move them up to a group level for sure.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So we mentioned a few, well, obviously mentioned XG, expected goals and stuff, Tom. So I want to ask you because I'm not in the weeds as much as you are, obviously. So is there any kind of newer metrics either that are recently out there, maybe something that's in the pipeline that I wouldn't have heard about that you find interesting that people will want to know about?
Yeah, I think to be honest with you, the work that Skill Corner have been bringing out recently, in terms of they've started bringing out run types. So initially, for those that don't know, Skill Corner are a broadcast tracking data company based in Paris, in France. And yeah, probably one of the first companies in that area of broadcast tracking to essentially point a machine at a computer, make it watch a game of football, identify the players, work out the distances. And to start with, it's like doing all this work and expending all this power and energy to bring you back like distance covered from a player in a game. And then how can you get more nuanced and break it down to distance with the ball, against the ball, top speeds, acceleration, etc. And again, this is like an interesting space where some clubs have tried to do these things in-house.
Mm.
It doesn't make sense for clubs to really, in my opinion, do it in-house because the providers are going to have more time, more people,
Yeah.
more ability to probably create better things than you are in a club.
Yeah.
So seeing the development of that has gone from like physical summaries to the types of runs that players make, and I found that really interesting because I've always thought it's been tough to sometimes differentiate between like a 6 and an 8 when looking at event data.
Mm.
You can help a little bit with a heat map, but sometimes feels with that you're trying to like read between the tea leaves. It's not always the clearest. You can look at the minutes they played in positions, but you're still not really getting a full answer. Whereas the run types can give you sometimes a bit of a clearer edge on like if this guy is only ever dropping to receive a pass and never going forwards, he's probably we can infer a bit more that he's probably more of a 6. Um, so I found just the stuff they've been doing there really interesting and iterative and yeah, worked with them on a few projects and find that the direction that work's going and the level of innovation there is probably the best in the industry we're seeing from a data company at the moment. So yeah, really interested with what they're doing.
Cool. So what kind of run types are there then, Tom? Like, are you mentioning a dropping deep, like running in behind, I presume? Like, what else? How else can we quantify those kind of runs?
Yeah, I think they also have ones like running into they call it like pulling half space, but I think it's more like a channel run, like player running into the channel. You've got like a cross receiver run, so balls out wide, like you running into the box to try and get on the end of a cross, whether it's kind of delivered or not.
Mm.
Also looking at when they're a build up, like do you drop in? Do you also like pull wide to try and create more space out wide? So there's only I think it's 10 run types in total without checking,
Yeah.
which doesn't maybe seem like a lot, but I think it encapsulates all the key ones and ones that you kind of care about. And when you go through the data and look at, who's doing the most runs in behind, who's doing the most runs ahead of the ball to kind of get up pitch on a counter or in attack, it always passes the smell test, which is always a good sign with a metric. I remember hearing one bit of advice I got years ago of like if you're devising any new metric and you get the top list of 10, and if there are 8 names you know and 2 names you don't, that's usually a pretty good, that's like a not a bad way of checking that the metric works because it's not fully like confirmation bias. This is what it looks like, but it's also giving you some new information that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Mm.
Otherwise, it's kind of pointless having the metric. So yeah, really finding that stuff useful.
Nice. So one thing that I think I've seen you talking about this on another podcast a couple of years ago, Tom, was the piece you did about kind of the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you about that in terms of are there any like popular ones in terms of metrics that are commonly misused, misunderstood by people that maybe because now XG is kind of a lot more mainstream than it used to be. You're seeing even more stuff like on Sky Sports News and stuff like that. Is there anything that maybe they're presenting in a not so great way that you feel like could be done better?
Yeah, I always feel like the ones with Sky Sports News, you'll get rankings for like total tackles or things like that, total passes. Um, I think you'll always get that level of just like basic data usage, and you'll never really change it. It's trying to be too complex or too nuanced. They just won't be interested to change that really. The only thing I probably think it's not necessarily like if I was to do like an 11th commandment now, it's probably that there's more to football analytics than just building pizza charts, and that's probably a bit of a beast I created myself because I guess from doing work at the Athletic, kind of like was influenced by someone else who created that style, then obviously brought it into the Athletic and it gets used everywhere, and then more and more kind of people look to use that style, and I do think it's the best way of um looking at player data for sure. But I think there's more viz types and more ways to talk about a player than just using pizza charts. And almost like at times seeing them used with clubs, there's like too many metrics. There are metrics on there which are like correlated with each other. There are metrics which the distribution of them means that you only need to do something like half a time more a game, and that changes you from the best player to the worst player. So um, that would definitely be one which it's less so in the media. And to answer you, I don't necessarily like watch Monday night. I watch Monday Night Football like probably once a month, that kind of thing. I always think they're always top tier in terms of how they use data, how they deliver the message. But apart from that, don't really see too much more to kind of comment on
Mm.
lack of use. But definitely in terms of like Twitter and other places like this, there can be a bit more to football than just the pizza chance.
Yeah. Okay, so if you've made it this far into the video, you must be enjoying the content. Either that or you have simply fallen asleep. So whichever one of them it is, you probably won't mind me asking you for a quick favour. So as you know, I'm always looking to grow the channel. So the bigger the channel gets, the more people we can reach and impact, but also the bigger and better guests we can invite on to the channel to have these types of chats. So with that in mind, if you haven't already done so, I would very much appreciate it if you did hit the subscribe button down below the video. The stats are showing around 25% of viewers are subscribed. So there's a big chunk of you that are watching the videos, but you haven't yet hit the subscribe button, but I will let you off because you can do it right now. It's free and it literally takes 1 second. So if you go down, click the subscribe button, it would mean a lot to the channel and help the channel to grow. So that's all for now. Let's get back to the video. Obviously, Prospect is kind of an AI-driven company now. We've touched the word AI has kind of been spoken about before, and kind of the future and developments for the future. I'm just curious to ask you, Tom, in terms of if you had a crystal ball and you looked 5, 10 years into the future, what does sports analytics look like then? Maybe what can you predict? What holds you to anything, but what can you see coming?
Yeah, I think it's more just like how do we have the tools that we have at the moment and build them in a way which essentially is using AI to make our jobs a bit easier. I think the first one we've really seen as a product is David Sumpter, who you've obviously had on the podcast in the past. What they're doing at 12 Football, I find really interesting. I think there's a similar product there for scouting, for scout reports, to essentially tap into all these scout reports that clubs are putting into a system. How do you actually use this chatbot interface, this AI in the background to give you like essentially you've got this like wealth of probably unstructured data and information, but how can you pull back like a shortlist, or how can you ask questions of your reports? I think AI is just a really interesting tool. When we say AI, like invariably everyone just means ChatGPT, so we might as well just say ChatGPT. But I think it's a really good way of like how can you keep consistency among certain things that you do. So if I'm writing a scout report against like a certain template, can I put it into one of the like a custom built GPT and say, what does my report need or what is it missing? And it can go back and be like, well, I think you're writing about like a 6. You mentioned all these things. You've not mentioned this. You've mentioned that he's doing this. And like, how can you almost like audit and regulate the reports you're writing as a scout against like a consistent template? Like that's something in scouting, which is really important to learn as a scout. It's not just say what you see, but it's say what you see against a template of like things you care about in that position. And I think using AI, again, using ChatGPT to help you do things like that would be really cool to see. And then the rest of it is just going to be, I mean, like you could say Skill Corner is AI in the sense that they're using models to get broadcast tracking data. That's only going to get more accurate. There's probably at some point going to be a level of automated event data collection for people. So not just getting the physical stuff, but actually be able to tag passes, shots, tackles purely through pointing a computer at video and getting it to watch. So that means there'll probably be more entrance into the event data market. The barriers to entry for that will be a lot lower. The price could come down. More leagues are collected, better quality data. Like that could have a big impact on the industry. But I think we're still waiting for that to happen. I don't think it's happened just yet. I think that could be, if you could sit at home, have a stream of the game going on at the end of it, you could like automate a dashboard from event and tracking data collection from an AI. Like that's really quite powerful. So I think we'll get there at some point. But yeah, I think those are the main things really, which we'll see tangibly, which will change in the industry.
Yeah, perfect. So let's talk a little bit more on kind of advice for analysts. So you were part of the APFA event, Jobs in Football, last year, which was good in terms of hearing from people like yourself that have kind of gone on that path and kind of forged out a career in sport. So you touched upon it a little bit earlier, Tom, in terms of kind of hiring and what you're looking for. So that's what I wanted to ask you. Like, aside from the skill set of being able to analyze data, what are you looking for when I presume, have you interviewed people for jobs then?
Yeah, hired a few people in various the companies I've worked for up to this point, so definitely had kind of experience in that. And I'd say on the whole, the hires have gone pretty well because most of them are still in the jobs, so that's usually a good sign. Yeah, I think main things are probably like a willingness and openness to learn and be able to kind of like take on feedback. That's always something which probably is a bit of a non-negotiable. Because I mean, ultimately, as an analyst, if you want to be a data analyst, a scientist, and engineer, like coming up in the space, you're going to make a lot of mistakes or learn a lot of things, and being comfortable with that and comfortable like learning from that is a big one. It's an easy one, so definitely that.
Mm.
Um, Hardworking is another one. People who don't mind putting in the hard yards. It's the odd late night and things like that. It's hard to really test for that, but I think you can get a bit of a judge of that people's character when they're delivering work, etc. Clean code. So there's obviously usually like a technical task. I'd rather someone write code in a clean, easy to read way with comments and things like that, more than writing the most efficient solution to the problem. I definitely think that's been a key one for me, because it just makes everything easier when you're collaborating on code bases together. And then yeah, I think also just like seeing how people structure their thinking, and it's that whole thing of like show you're working out, not just the final product. I think is really important. Technical skills obviously useful. Usually R or Python. I predominantly code in R at this point. But I think either's fine. And then also just like being able to communicate with others and actually be able to break topics down into how do you communicate it to, again, different audiences. That's usually been like a question I've asked of, how would you present this data back to a sporting director versus a mate of yours if you're trying to win an argument about which player is better, and seeing how they like um, use that task and use that lens to change the work that they do is always like quite an interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So another thing then is kind of just going back to that kind of starting out on your portfolio, but also networking as well. So because I think a lot of people will see you on Twitter, 50,000 followers or whatever on Twitter. Obviously, you didn't start like that, but when
Yeah.
people starting out, they think, well, I'm posting this out to 10 followers. Like, what's the point? Is anyone going to see it? Kind of, what's your thoughts on that? And I mean, I presume you started with no following anyway. So
Yeah.
how did you kind of build that up?
Yeah, just started and then just started trying to again, not like spamming people, but tagging people you think it might be interesting and relevant for. So when I was writing things in MLS, there was a small like blogging group of people who I didn't really know. American Soccer Analysis is the kind of group, and again, they're kind of still going today. And I
Hmm.
think I like tagged a few of those guys and said, is this interesting for you? And like how can I target my work to people who might be interested, can give me feedback, can maybe give me, and it's not the reason to do it, but like maybe they have a platform, they can retweet it and things like that. So that was the thinking in the start, like how can I target getting my work in front of people to get them to kind of promote it and send it back and give me feedback. It's definitely worth it. Like if you have 0 followers, if you have 10 followers, like it soon does build up. If you're consistent and you're writing interesting things, like people will come and will get interested. I also think it's fine and it's a good thing to DM or tag people and say, check out my work. I think where it goes overboard sometimes are people like consistently like spam
Yeah.
and always tag people and things like that. I think that's actually, I don't think like it's just one of those things that happen. People can get frustrated by that. They'll just turn off tagging, they'll mute you, whatever. So it's going to be balanced with that, really.
Yeah.
But I also think as well, like I've seen Twitter's been, because of what's happened with the company of late, it's been um, less of a place for work like that. And I see more on LinkedIn, which I think is quite interesting. And the tone on LinkedIn is obviously more like professional and it's more formal and things like this. It's not necessarily like as fun as Twitter was a few years ago, but I think that sharing the same stuff on LinkedIn, like you mentioned Liam before. Liam's done an excellent job of kind of co-sharing on different platforms and trying to build a following, and I think that's important as well. Kind of spread that signal as far as you can on different platforms.
Yeah. Yeah, LinkedIn is very big for kind of growth. I mean, like it's good for sharing stuff on there, and just on Twitter as well. Like, I know probably won't be the only one, but like I don't follow anyone on Twitter, but I use lists. So like I might not follow you, but I will see your stuff. Like, and I'm
Yeah,
sure people in clubs do that as well. They might have a list for MLS analysis, and they can just go to that and add you in there. So yeah,
yeah,
you might not think people will see the word, but people probably will. So in terms of just on the topic of kind of people starting out, then Tom, quickly, I'm cautious of time as well, but in terms of kind of reaching out to people, because I think a lot of people will send. Well, firstly, they probably won't know what to say.
mm,
The cold DM or whatever. And I think some people are kind of, they just target messages for people that are miles ahead of them, and then obviously they get a lot of DMs anyway, so they might not even see it. But I think
yeah.
what you did starting out when you had that group of people that were kind of on that same journey together, and you
Yeah.
kind of bounced ideas. I think that is what a lot of people probably should do more of. But have you got any tips in terms of kind of reaching out to just random people on the internet? Obviously, I reached out to you randomly, so
It works, yeah. I'd say, to be fair, my main one, which I've learned since, is like just keep it short and to the point. So like just like, hello, done this piece of work, here's the link, would appreciate your feedback. Then you can get really write a really clear message and say like really interesting work, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, a lot of people will probably get a lot of these messages and just like having like short and sweet is good. And then also if you're asking for feedback, like is there something specific you're interested in feedback in? Is it just you're just trying to get eyes on it and just get people interested? Or, I think it's more interesting if you say, look, I've done this. Is there something I'm missing here? Is there another angle I could have approached this?
Mm.
How would you add to this with more granular data, like someone in your position, etc.
Mm.
Um, I think depending on the piece of work, like there are always analysts at clubs I find, both on the recruitment side and the performance side, who are massively overworked, massively underpaid, and usually are interested, but like that's the nature of the role, but they're also interested in different ideas. And I think targeting analysts at clubs specifically to say like, look, like, how would you do this?
Mm.
Instead of going for those who are at like, Man United or Liverpool, etc. Like, can you target an academy analyst who's essentially doing the same kind of work,
Yeah.
but just at a lower level? Can you target someone who's an analyst at a League Two club because you're more likely to maybe get a foot in the door with a club at a lower level where the opportunities are maybe there's more scope for an opportunity there than you would at the top level. So I think again, if I was starting out, I'd maybe how can I get into someone who's at like a League One club and be like, look, I've done this on your club. They've probably never seen any of the sorts of analysis
Yeah.
for, I don't know, a club at their level. So can you target that and really go for that? I think I was watching a podcast with Tim Keach recently, and obviously his whole thing was they just did a big analysis on Swansea and someone printed it out and took it to the AGM. Like
Mm.
that is really smart. So how can you replicate something like that on a club maybe near you or a lower Swansea's not at a lower level, they're still in the
Mm.
chat, but like something like that, I think is a good approach.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. So, well, what I always do, Tom, I always ask people at the end in terms of any books or podcasts that you can recommend, and this doesn't have to be sports analytics; it can be anything that you take a fancy in. So,
Yeah.
anything you want to give a shout out to?
I think one of the books which definitely changed my thinking about a lot of things is a book called Super Forecasting by
Mhm.
Philip Tetlock. So it's all about like essentially a small group of people who are really, really good at forecasting future events. And I think that has a lot of implications across analysis, the way of thinking that kind of approach to thinking has a lot of implications across analysis, across scouting, definitely. And I just found was really, really interesting. And then yeah, I was, thinking fast and slow as well was another one, which is a bit of a labor of love to get through it. Essentially, it's a load of journal articles tied up into a book. But again, I think human biases and how to accommodate those and how to use those effectively. I think that was a really interesting book which shaped my thinking a lot. And I think the other thing as well is a lot of people in this play again be amazing to go back 10 years ago and see how things look like for a lot of people coming through now and interested in this space now. But it's hard to do that. Twitter's not as good as it was. LinkedIn's maybe more the platform of choice now. But I would say if you can do the digging, there's a lot of old analysis and old blogs which are worth going through because the old ideas are the ones that they've taken into clubs and are still using today.
Yeah.
So can you go through the old stats on blogs? Can you find Michael Cayley's old work on cartilage free captain? Can you go through these old football analytics blogs and take the ideas from there? Who are can you find analysts who've gone into clubs, find their blogs, and look at the stuff they were writing about? I think in this space, the current work you see publicly isn't nowhere near the standard of what it was 10 years ago. And that's because you had a really strong community now of people with different backgrounds and areas. But there's been a brain drain because they've all gone to work in the industry. So yeah, that's if you're interested in reading stuff in football, that's where I'd probably look to find that. And I think I've got an old piece on Medium somewhere saying like these are the places to read football analytics articles, and I think some of the blogs and pages are still up. So yeah, tuck into that if you have some time.
Nice. Perfect. Perfect. Anything else you want to give a shout out to, Tom? Where can people find you? Twitter, LinkedIn, we've mentioned. So give a what's your handles and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, find me on Twitter. I don't really tweet as much these days, but DMs are open if people have questions and things like that. It's at Worville. And then yeah, same, just Tom Worville on LinkedIn. And yeah, Chris, thanks a lot for having me on. Really enjoyed this. And yeah, any questions, anyone, feedback, etc. Always all ears. So yeah, go for it.
Amazing, amazing. Tom, thanks very much for your time. I will let you get off. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the Euros this summer as well.
Cool. Thank you, mate. Speak soon.
See you soon. Bye bye.